because CISOs come from an extraordinarily technical background per se, the feeling of having to hold on to those technical skills and to use those technical skills is a barrier to joining people in the suite of business where they're talking about business issues and business risks.
Yeah.
So letting go of that technical understanding and capability to the extent that you can become a business leader.
NetSeg or bust, keep your network zero trust. NetSeg.io, where the data needs to go.
All right, great to have you here, Marty. Thanks a lot for agreeing to go on the podcast and sharing a bit about your experience. Now,
Sure.
Some of the people might be wondering, this is a cybersecurity podcast. You're a leadership expert. Do you want to start by sharing a little bit about your background, and then I'll share a little bit about why I thought you'd be a really good guest to have on the podcast?
Sure, Leon, no worries. So I started my early career in IT in 1985. This is way before IT was cool. So I was a software developer and I worked for a large bank in Sydney. That was my very first real job in 1985.
Yeah.
And since then I've gone into project management and leadership, transitioned out of IT, but I still have a very close affinity with the complex problem of trying to take technology and adapt it for business purposes, which is something I don't think the world has solved yet. And particularly with the march of AI, I think this is becoming more and more of a skill that most leaders struggle with. So yeah, that's what I'm really focused on. I've been across multiple industries, so I've worked in mining, insurance, rail freight transportation and energy, and I've worked across a bunch of different portfolios. CIO, CFO, head of sales and marketing, head of strategy, and eventually chief executive. So I've sort of done the tour and I've seen a lot of problems in many different contexts, and I've been able to see what's common between them, which I think's what I bring to the world in my leadership work.
Yeah, 100%. And so can you share a little bit then about, you've taken all that experience and you've built that into the venture that's not new anymore, it's been going for a few years now, in helping the world's, what is the catchphrase?
Improving the quality of leaders globally.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
So how does that work? What does that look like? What sort of people come to you for?
It's worth going back to the history here because I just finished my stint after 5 years as Chief Executive of CS Energy, which is an energy business that generates electricity, generated about a third of Queensland's electricity at the time I was running it. And when I was coming up to the end of my contract there, my daughter Emma came to me and said, Dad, you need to do something different. I said, well, I'm going to get a bigger CEO job.
Yeah.
And she said, no, you're going to do so much more in the world. I said, I know, I'm going to get a bigger CEO job. And she said, no, you've got to get your content out there. I know how valuable it is and I know what you can do, and you need to have a bigger impact. And so she hit my hot button and then told me that the way to do that was to get my very, very best content and knowledge over a 30+ year executive career and give it away for free.
Yep.
So that's what we decided to do. And the podcast is the incarnation of that, that really key, practical, implementable stuff in leadership that anyone can pick up and use, including tech sector.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And look, I remember, reading, first discovered it, one of the first few podcasts you shared on LinkedIn, and I'm like, this is what the world needs. I've done an MBA, a lot of that content can be quite dry and academic. A no bullshit approach to leadership, which is what the podcast is called. Yeah. Every week there's practical advice, and I think you're 400 episodes in now.
400 big episodes and almost 200 moments episodes. So yeah, a lot of content out there. It's a big catalogue.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, that's free for anyone. And so I often talk to cyber leaders who are struggling with some aspects of leadership. I'm like, I know an exact podcast I can send you, or look it up and share it with them and go, just have a listen to this. It's 20 minutes. And it's going to change the whole way you interact with your team for the whole next week and beyond. Yeah,
it's good. The thing we love about it is that you can listen to an episode on the way in the morning, and you can implement it that day.
Yes.
These tools are very, very easy to grab onto and go, oh shit, I'll try that, because it's a simple fix, but it takes a lot of discipline to be able to do it consistently.
Yes. Yeah, and I like how practical it is. So I think the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast was because I deal with a lot of cyber leaders day to day and have for a long time. You talked about getting into IT before it was cool. I've been in cyber before it was cool, and now it's really hot. And so 10 years ago, cybersecurity, there might have been one person doing that, or it might have been part of someone's job. Now in a lot of larger organizations, you'll have a cyber leader, a chief information security officer. They might report to the CIO, they might not. And they'll often have a team underneath them.
Yes.
So they need to lead that team where maybe they haven't had a lot of formal instruction about what good leadership looks like. You know, they might think of themselves as managers instead of leaders, and they're just focused on, you know, pushing their team and trying to get whatever KPIs they need to get hit versus how to really get the best out of this person and build a culture.
For sure.
And so the reason I thought this was helpful is to give cyber leaders some exposure to what good leadership can actually look like, and particularly in the industrial sector where I think, you know, what's interesting with cybersecurity is you've got your team underneath, you've got to lead that team and build them up and things like that. But then also cross-functionally now, especially with cyber being more relevant, you've got to influence the executive committee. A lot of CISOs present to boards at least once a year. So there's a lot more interest at that level, and you also need to influence cross-functionally, particularly in industrial organisations where your IT cybersecurity program is probably going fantastically because you might work for the CIO, you work with those teams, you're all in the same building together. In the industrial world, you're going to have to go and make friends and build a really good cooperative working relationship with the people at the shop floor, out in the plant or the power station or wherever you might be working. And these people are out where the money's actually made in the organisation.
Yeah.
And as a cyber leader, if you come in waving a clipboard around saying you got to stop this right now because it's a cyber risk, and they're going to invite you to leave.
They will, and not in those words. If you're in a mining company, they'll tell you in no uncertain terms. So I think the problem is the same, but I think the visibility and the criticality of information security is just elevated massively in the last 5 years. Now there are a number of factors behind that. But I think what it means now is that what used to be sort of like an afterthought and a, you know, CISO should be seen and not heard style of culture has now become very much a key risk. It turns up on the board's risk register. Like boards of directors are asking the questions. You don't need to see too many cyber breaches to understand what a risk it can be to your company.
Yes.
And so this has now become front and centre in risk management. And so the CISO has had their status elevated massively. Now this is good and bad, right? Because the good part about it is you've got much more chance of getting funding.
Yep.
You've got much more chance of getting visibility and acceptance from the rest of the business because it's such an elevated risk.
Yep.
But the bad is you've now got to be able to explain things that are inherently complex, very technically difficult to explain, and to translate that into the business risk.
Yep.
And that's a very hard thing to do for anyone. So as my background as a chief information officer, particularly working in companies where they thought IT was a cost and not a benefit, it was very much a challenge of how do I describe the risk factors, the benefits that can be achieved, the compliance need, and then the fact that if you want business continuity, like you might be okay, you know, 364 days a year, it's the 365th day you're going to need the thing that we're telling you need to invest in.
Yep.
And so being able to couch that the right way in business terms is the challenge for the CISO and other information security experts.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think there are lots of risks that are seen at a risk level of a business, and cyber is just one of those.
Yeah.
It's one that people are more conscious of. But I think as well, if you go down the fear-mongering path and say, well, you know, it's going to be the end of the world if we get hacked, you know, that's not going to give you the same kind of credibility if you can articulate, well, these are the business risks that we're worried about, and here's where cyber can become a root cause to these business risks.
Exactly, yeah. And so, you know, you've got this heightened media awareness as well. So the impact of any sort of cyber breach is now much greater than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. AI, of course, bringing it much more into the forefront of fraud, you know, deception, you know, schemes that are designed to breach, you know, any security firewalls you have, and to get inside your systems means that you've got to be on your game. Like you weren't fighting these same threats, you know, 5 or 10 years ago. I never had the the dubious honour of having to fight those types of threats. So when I was talking to business leaders, particularly in industrial businesses, it was really about convincing them that investment was worthwhile. And there was always a really big demarcation between the SCADA systems that the engineers ran, that were the, you know, the machine and operating based systems, and head office computing, and they were two very, very separate things. So working out what relative investment needed to happen across those different platforms was a key challenge. Now I think all of that falls under the bailiwick of the CISO. So they've got to make sure that operationally they're sound. So in critical infrastructure businesses like water and electricity, and you know, fuel refining, things like that, there's got to be this level of heightened awareness and heightened security and safeguards around that. Near enough's not good enough anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you're a cyber leader coming into an industrial organisation, maybe you've been doing the role well at an IT level but never really cracked the OT program, or maybe you're new to a business and there's there's no real OT program, you don't know who to talk to. How do you start from, a standing start and get the right, use leadership principles to get the right engagement, to get the right conversation on the table and the right sort of funding to drive an effective program?
Yeah, so one of the key things is, and Leon, that we talk about working at the right level.
Yeah.
So if you're paid as a senior or the most senior information security person in your business, then it's incumbent upon you to understand the business well enough that you can have smart conversations. You can't do that unless you're working at the right level.
Yeah.
So unless you're looking up and out rather than in and down. And because CISOs come from an extraordinarily technical background per se, the feeling of having to hold on to those technical skills and to use those technical skills is a barrier to joining people in the suite of business where they're talking about business issues and business risks.
Yeah.
So letting go of that technical understanding and capability to the extent that you can become a business leader who gets technology and who knows what's at stake.
Yeah.
That's the transition. So it's really about working at the right level and looking up and out rather than in and down.
And that's one of the classic mistakes you make if you've been promoted up, is dipping down, because you know how to do your team's job. But if you're doing that for them,
Absolutely.
That's not what you're paid to do anymore, right?
Absolutely. The most overpaid, like firewall coder you've ever seen, right?
Yeah.
Is the CISO who can't get out of the detail.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And so if you've come up from that technical aspect and then all of a sudden, you're in the boardroom, they say 2 months later, there's a board meeting coming up, we'd like you to present to the board about that. How do you prepare if you've never really sat in that kind of room before?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and these sorts of things are growth experiences for sure. But I think there are some fundamentals about presentations that are really, really important about understanding how to present information and how to talk about it and how to position the data that you've got. I've got a couple of good podcast episodes. In fact, if you can put the links in the show notes to this episode, that'd be great.
Yep.
Just about, first thing is understanding how to make a good presentation.
Yep.
So there's no point in putting a chart up that's got a trend line and then saying, the trend line is positively heading to the right, Okay, we can see that, Einstein, Tell us why, give us an insight on that data that you just presented.
Yep.
So it's about, few words, lots of visual images, and heaps of insight in a presentation. And doing that with a highly technical subject area is difficult.
Yes.
So that's we've got a podcast episode called Epic Presentation Fails. It's an oldie but a goldie.
Okay.
So I'll give you a link to
Put
that.
in there.
And also the one about, it's very daunting when you haven't been in front of a board before to go in there confidently and start talking about things that are dear to you, and you wonder how they're going to react, when you give them that message.
Yeah.
Particularly if the messaging is, doom and gloom. So there's another episode about how to actually overcome your stage fright, your lack of confidence about going into a daunting presentation situation. So those two episodes, 45 minutes well spent to listen to those.
Yep, and you're not going to get it perfect the first time, but the only way you're going to get better is by making those mistakes and just learning from experience.
Like everything, just do the reps. Just keep going, keep going, keep going. You'll suck at first at everything you try that's new. Just accept that and keep going, because at some point in time, you've got to become the person who can have those conversations and make those presentations and articulate the risk and understand all the technical elements of it, because you've got your people, advising you about what's going on.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, no, terrific. So, in terms of, one of the interesting things I thought we'd bring up is the different forms of power, because I think if you think about a typical manager from the 70s or the 80s that, comes in and cracks heads, that's that, power by authority title, this is my kind of authority. But there are different kinds of power that we want to use at different times, and I think the gold standard you want to adopt is that referent power, where people want to follow you because you're leading them. They have faith in you, in your knowledge and the way you work with them. They feel they can trust you. Certainly when working with industrial organisations and those people, in the OT environments, it's been really actually interesting just by starting by framing, I'm interested in where cyber can impact what you're doing.
Yes.
Safety and productivity, right? And when I frame it like that and talk about, we're not worried about data loss so much as a cyber incident stopping things moving.
Yes, exactly.
Or someone getting hurt. That's not what we want to avoid. All of a sudden, by framing it like that, I'm getting back from OT people or people who work in OT, that's really interesting. And suddenly they're curious about cybersecurity because I've framed it in a way that impacts what they do day to day. And now they see, oh, I've got someone who I can have a productive conversation with, who's not going to punish me or tell me how to suck eggs.
Yes.
They're actually a partner who can help me learn how I can do what I do better and help do all the right things in the interest of the organisation without making me feel like I'm have any shortcomings.
And this is a leadership skill, is that there are experts for every different flavour of problem you might want.
Yeah.
Legal experts, risk experts, compliance experts, safety experts. They're all over the place, and knowing how to get value out of them is difficult. But the one distinguishing characteristic of a really good functional leader in safety or technology or anything else is that they can understand the problem that they're solving.
Yep.
They can understand and address that problem, and they can talk to the individual and add value. Now, if you can't add value, if you're just going to go in there with a rule book and say, follow these rules, you've lost it.
Yes.
And you can't just walk in and be a policeman and say, well, hang on, that's not right, and that's not right, and that's not right. So you can't be an auditor, you can't be a rule imposer. You've got to be someone who can bring value with your expertise. So lead with the expertise every time.
Yep.
So I have skill in this area, you have risk in your area, let me work with you to help you cover off that risk so that you don't have these issues that are plaguing some other organisations and teams.
Yep.
And I think that, lead with the value. The most hated 8 words in an operator's life are, I'm from corporate and I'm here to help. Right? If you say, I'm from corporate and I'm here to help, gone.
Forget it.
Absolutely gone,
Yeah, that's right. And I think one of the things cybersecurity doesn't lack is standards, and some of these standards are very involve a lot of tick box and audits. And I'm sure we've all been in situations where we're trying to get in someone's diary and they're like, look, I'm up to my eyeballs in audits for the next 2 months. It's just ridiculous.
Absolutely.
And being able to say, well, we might have to tick these boxes, but let's be practical, understand what's going on in your organisation, what those operational constraints are, so we can protect the organisation effectively, meet our external regulatory requirements. Stranger that with some of the regulated industries you've been in.
Sure.
It's that getting that right balance and bringing the people on the journey, I think, where they don't report to you, so the only way you can really get them on board, aside from getting their boss to come down on them, which isn't very effective most of the time.
No, it'll get you a result once.
Yes.
It won't get you a result long term. So the biggest problem is people who go in with this audit and compliance mentality, which is, I've got to get all these check boxes checked off.
Yep.
Right, this is a thing that I've got to get done, or I want the perfect spreadsheet, or I want the perfect checklist. No, don't do that. Like anything else, you've got to prioritise based on value materiality.
Yep.
So you might look at 20 things that you've got to check off your list, and there's 3 that are really important.
Yep.
So if you can go in and say, look, there's 20 things here. If we want to be fully compliant, we do the 20, but the biggest risk we've got at the moment is this and this.
Yep.
So let's just work on those. If we can get those covered off, I'm a happy camper.
Yeah.
I'll keep everyone else off your back.
Yeah.
If you can mitigate these 2 critical organisational risks.
Yep.
And the other 18, we'll get to them one day, or we won't.
Yeah.
But that's not going to make or break our business.
Yeah.
So I think having that common sense approach and showing the empathy that understands what an operator's going through, so that you can be a partner to them, as opposed to someone who they just avoid because you're going to give them more work and they can't see the value in the work.
Absolutely.
They've got to be able to see the value that comes through.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I've answered your question about power, Leon, but I think it's a good framing, because when you think about the different types of power, all of them are relevant at a different point in time, and all of them can be used under different circumstances. You're absolutely right that referent power is the main thing, and particularly as a functional leader, just the ability to have people trust you and respect what you're doing and see that you have their best interests and the good of the organisation at heart. That's going to get you 90% of the way. It really is. Yeah. And yes, sometimes you'll need coercive power. Sometimes you'll need to say, look, you've been delinquent on this for 3 months, and it's a big risk, and I'm going to need to escalate this. But sometimes you've got to use coercive power. Sometimes you've got to use expert power and say, look, here's the technical ins and outs of what you're doing. That's not good enough. Let's do this. So there's a whole range of things that you can do in using different types of power. But you want people to follow you because you're creating value for them. And that they trust that you're going to keep them out of the shit. That's the whole point.
Yeah, that's going to be a lot more effective than trying to drag someone kicking and screaming to meet some imaginary objective that is just not practical in most organisations.
Absolutely. And once one of these people in a business unit or an OT, once they trust you, that's it. You've won them in the relationship. And then you've just got to be careful not to destroy that with any bullshit like, let's tick the other 18 boxes that we want to tick,
Yeah.
But as long as you're not doing that, as long as they trust that you have a practical, high traction method of creating value for them, you're golden.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you really want to have that trust so that when something does happen, when you say, look, we need to take something off, do an e-stop or something because we've identified something really bad that could cause a big, you want them to be able to understand you and trust you and say, yep, we'll support that because we trust you well enough to know that this is serious. And that's really when you really need people to trust you.
Exactly, exactly, yeah. You don't want to be crying wolf too often.
Oh,
absolutely. That just desensitises
right.
the organisation to the key risks you actually do have to deal with.
Yeah.
So you don't want that to happen.
Yeah, and that's another reason why the scaremongering is just not really very effective.
It's just not helpful.
Yeah.
You're basically painting yourself into a corner when you do that.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you say the world's going to end and the world doesn't, then no one listens to you anymore.
Yep.
That's just the way it works.
Yeah.
People are people, right?
You can't come back from that.
No, it's hard, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely right. So, are there any other signs of what good leadership looks like? And are there maybe some mistakes to avoid? We've talked about a few of them, like coming in and waving your title around, things like that. A couple of things for a cyber leader to think about, like what makes a good cyber leader? What might I be doing when you say, you might say something, what's a mistake that someone could be making to catch themselves and go, instead of doing that, I need to do something different?
Yeah, I'll talk about probably the key principles in our model that you're very familiar with, Leon. Yep. So the first thing I think is to always be focused on value.
Yep.
Right? It's not activity for its own sake, it's not compliance, it is what is the value in doing what I'm doing and then asking others in the organisation to behave a certain way.
Yep.
So I always start with that very first premise of where's the value in what I'm doing?
Yep.
Working at the right level, so making sure, as I said, you're looking up and out, not in and down, and that you're getting out of that technical detail that your teams are being paid to be consumed with.
Yep.
Accountability is, as I like to say, the number one thing. The number one thing in improving team performance is strong single point accountability. And if you don't have that, then it's very, very hard to get outcomes because everyone does this. Not my problem, someone else's problem. I was only doing this bit, I wasn't doing that bit. So it's just it's a vicious circle. Shared accountability is no accountability. And then to tie all that together, because I'm still going. One more thing. To tie all of this together, it's incredibly important that you can handle conflict comfortably.
Yeah.
And this is a major stumbling block that I've seen in leaders all the way up through the ranks, all the way from the chairman of an ASX 50 board through to a frontline leader. Yeah. Is the ability to put respect before popularity, to comfortably step into a conflict situation, to not take it personally, to focus on the other person, and to just resolve that conflict in a way that is calm and rational without it escalating emotionally. Yeah. Most leaders I know avoid those things like the plague. So if you want to focus on value, you've got to stop a lot of shit.
Yep.
That's going to cause an amount of conflict.
Yep.
If you want to work at the right level, you've got to say no to people. That's going to cause conflict. Yep. If you hold people accountable, that causes conflict because you've got to tell them when they're not meeting their accountabilities. Yep. So the ability to handle conflict sits below and runs through all of that, respect before popularity.
Yep. So is avoiding is handling conflict well and facing it head on, is that one of those things that really you only get better with practice?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yep. It's miles under the skis, mate. It's just, when you've got to have the will, it's 90% will and 10% skill. Yep. You've got to have the will to take on a conflict situation. Your reptile brain is going to be telling you to run away. Yep. Fight or flight kicks in. Yep. And you've got to be disciplined enough to say, it needs to be done, I'm going to do it. Yep. I know it'll be better after I've done it. Yep. And no conflict gets better with time. It deteriorates and gets worse. So if you leave something unresolved, it just festers and it gets worse and worse and worse. So dealing with things quickly, easily, and when it's most relevant, pays you back in spades. It really does. But it's a discipline. It takes a while to get on top of. Yep. When we run our leadership programs, what we see is that the leaders who embrace this, and when we're studying this module, of handling conflict, they get out there and they just get themselves into action. Yep. And even after 2 or 3 conversations, they're going, wow, it already feels more comfortable. Yeah. None of these conversations was as bad as I thought it would be. Yep. It feels better already. I'm going to keep going. Just 2 or 3 conversations. The first step is sometimes the hardest in those. Yeah. And if you've done it as many hundreds of times as I have, probably thousands of times, it's just such a part of who you are as your nature as a leader that nothing is to be afraid of. You're not afraid of anything. You just walk into any situation, you're relaxed, you're calm, you're coherent, you're intellectually engaged, you're emotionally engaged. And to be able to do that is probably the most valuable skill I ever acquired as a leader.
Yep. So if you've been avoiding conflict as a cyber leader, find something low stakes and just lean into it. Try something today, because the only way you're going to do it and get good at it is just to practice. And
absolutely.
First few times you might not be great.
Let me go down the barrel of the camera now and give you some advice, because Leon's just done it. There's someone you know in your team right now that you should have had that conversation with that you haven't. So go and listen to episode 1 of the No Bullshit Leadership podcast, which is Respect Before Popularity, and episode 6, which is the psychology of feedback. You listen to those two, 30 minutes, 35 minutes of listening, and then get into action. It'll pay you back in spades for your whole career.
Yeah, 100%. No, that's fantastic. I mean, it reminds me of a conversation I had last year with two people actually, who one reported to me, one was an indirect report, dotted line kind of thing. And, they'd done the wrong thing, they made a mistake. And I just sat them down, focused on the facts and said, look, you made these mistakes. Can you help me understand a bit more about what you would have done differently? And they did the wrong thing, they made a mistake. I had to show them a couple of areas where they'd, they just weren't thinking. But there was no more tension in the room, and they were actually grateful. You could tell, we had a closer relationship post that. And actually, they respected me for the fact to tell them that. They were grateful for the feedback, and they were able to calibrate, so I'm not going to have that conversation with them anymore.
Exactly, Leon. And one of the saddest things I ever used to see in the corporate world was someone who'd been in a career for 20 or 30 years. They were in the twilight of their career, and they had some obvious performance or behavioural problems that no one had ever told them about. So I'd sit them down and say, hey, look, here are my observations. I know I don't know you that well, but these things are relatively obvious to me. And then they'd look at me and they'd lean back and they'd fold their arms and they'd narrow their eyes and they'd say, mate, I've had cracking performance management reports for the last 20 years. I've always been a high performer. Now you come along and tell me I'm not. It's not me, it's you. And that's heartbreaking, because no leader in their whole career had the guts to tell them the thing they most needed to hear, and it's held them back. And they just become bitter and twisted. They don't know why they're being held back. Well, it's because they've got an obvious problem that no one's bothered to tell them about. So that little cute one-liner, which is feedback is a gift, is actually true. And people choose to do what they will with it. You can't make them do anything, but your obligation is to tell them what you can see and to give them an opportunity to improve if they want to take that.
Absolutely. I think it's something that leaders have a duty to do that, because everyone deserves to have good quality leadership to guide them. And without doing that, you're not just selling yourself short, but you're robbing your team of the ability to improve.
Exactly. That's exactly right, Leon. Well said, mate.
Oh, thank you. So are there any other key mistakes that people should try and avoid, aside from maybe avoiding conflict and not giving feedback?
I think, stop avoiding conflict. Don't dip down into people's work. Like, instead of going in and rolling your sleeves up and doing the work for them, which is way easier than doing what you should be doing, which is to lead them to perform themselves. So you leave a vacuum for them to move into. You don't dive down into their work. You leave that vacuum and watch them grow. If you don't do that, you'll never know what the capability below you is like. You'll never know what they're capable of, because you've never stretched them.
Well, it's easy in the short term, but in the long term, you're going to pay for it, because you can't do any leadership work. You can't advocate for your team higher up. You're just stuck in there, still being the senior person of the team versus the leader.
Absolutely. You make yourself indispensable. Some people think it's a good idea, but it's not. As long as you're seen as being indispensable to the function of your team, you're not going anywhere. You're not getting promoted, you're not getting moved to another project. You're stuck where you are, because they know the team can't function without you. So instead of trying to make yourself indispensable, you should be trying to make yourself redundant. And a lot of people are afraid of that word, but if you can show that your team operates really, really well with or without you, you can be promoted, you can be moved, you can open yourself up to other opportunities.
That's exactly what, and then everyone's got more growth opportunities, and you're doing that role to a level that's really much more value accretive to the business versus being, the person who runs the firewalls.
Absolutely.
And, does the antivirus and things like that.
For sure.
That's fantastic, Marty. So we're probably, it's probably a good point to wrap it up at, but before we finish off, can you share a little bit about where people can go next if they want to learn? You've mentioned a few podcast episodes. Tell us a little bit about the podcast and what it's there for leaders to try and level up their own capabilities.
Sure, Leon. Yeah, so the podcast, No Bullshit Leadership. If you're in Australia or the US and you just type in leadership into Spotify, it'll come up either first or second. It's one of the most popular podcasts in the world now on leadership, which is fantastic. So we're getting a lot of exposure through the podcast. Every episode's short and sweet, 15 to 20 minutes, just attacks a problem in leadership and give you some practical tips for how to manage it.
Yep.
And it's just a solo cast, it's just me talking shit for 20 minutes, which is great.
Yep.
And we do the very, very odd interview. I had some good interviews when I was living in the US, so I interviewed Pat Lencioni, who a lot of your listeners would probably have heard of, who wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of the Team, and a couple of interviews over there, but it's mainly just solo cast.
Yeah.
So started the podcast, and if you like it, go to our website, yourceomentor.com, and there's heaps of goodies and freebies and tools there for you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of your podcast episodes come with a free downloadable, and those worksheets are helpful if, say you've listened to the podcast on your way into work, 20 minutes, and then you're at the office, might be 8:30, no one's in yet, you can get the worksheet out and just think about what you can do differently today to be a better leader. And I think
Absolutely.
if we're being that 1% better every day, over the course of a year or your entire career, it's going to be huge, not just for you, but for everyone who's working with you. And
Absolutely, it is huge. And you'll be pleased to know, Leon, being a tech guy, that we have, so I should say tech leader rather than tech guy.
It's okay.
Given that we're moving into the 21st century at pace, the PDF downloadables have now been replaced with AI resources that are much more interactive and help you generate things.
Yeah.
So if you look at the last few AI resources we put out there, they are just a fantastic way of taking the content from the podcast episode and understanding what it means in your particular context.
Yep.
That's awesome stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I know there are other things people can do that require investment, can take it to the next level, and you didn't want to promote that. You wanted to focus on get into the podcast first.
Absolutely.
It's free, or either only cost is your time, and really it's a fantastic development resource, whether you've been a leader for 20 years or you're just about to get promoted for the first time into a leadership role. I found it hugely valuable, those first few
thanks,
episodes
mate, I'm
I
glad.
listened to.
Yeah.
I'd been a leader beforehand, and I think I was doing it at the time for the wrong reasons. I wanted to be the boss, and it was very ego-driven. And I stepped back to individual contributor because I felt more comfortable doing that. And really listening to your podcast, I think 2018 was that when it first came out?
2018, yeah, late September 2018 was the first episode.
Yeah. So that's really what inspired me to take a fresh look at what leadership actually is. And I was the country manager for a medium-sized technology vendor in the industrial cybersecurity space, and then decided to take the next level to start my own business. And it's just me for the moment, but I've got to lead myself.
Absolutely.
And then as we grow, more people can come in, and I want to give them a really welcoming environment where they can develop and grow and add value, not just to NetSeg, but to our clients as well.
Absolutely. I mean, good luck with that, mate. It's good to see you out there. I mean, I've gone from being a sort of like CEO with thousands of people sometimes working for me to being an individual contributor again. So now I do content and I work with CEOs, and my daughter runs the business, Emma, out of Sydney. So it's all working out very, very well. But it's interesting going from being a leader of large companies to being an individual contributor in a small business. It's interesting.
Yeah, 100%, Marty. Any closing thoughts for the viewers?
Not really. I think embrace leadership. So just realise that your skill in the technical world is valuable, and it will always be valuable. But as you go up the ranks, you've got less and less connection to the technical work. So don't fear that, embrace it. Embrace the change and focus on becoming a professional leader who can actually lead people to get the best out of them, because that's how you multiply your effectiveness, that's how you get leverage, and that's how you get real results.
And to build on that, I'd say it's not always going to be easy. Sometimes there are going to be challenging moments, but that's the price of admission, and
Absolutely.
the rewards are worth the effort.
Absolutely. Couldn't
Thanks
have said
a
it
lot,
better
Marty.
myself. Thanks, Leon. Cheers,
Thanks,
mate. Thank you.